like 2 days ago, it was the 8th of May. The 8th of May is a normal day in most people's lives, except if you are a volunteer of the Red Cross. The 8th of May is the International Day of the Red Cross and Red Crescent, in which we celebrate in general, like the birth of Henry Dunant, the founder, but also in general, the whole movement of the Red Cross, one of the biggest humanitarian organization in the world. And because people who know me know this, I'm a big fan of the Red Cross. I've been a volunteer for almost 10 years now. I'm old. And I wanted to do something around this date because I know the association, know what they do, and I know how important it is. So, and especially inside of what the whole Red Cross does, the youth development department and the activities with youth volunteers or youth people are some of the strongest things I've ever seen, and some of the most important things I've ever seen done in my life, but also on my life, in the sense like I grew a lot thanks to Red Cross as a young person. So to ask to introduce a lecture and in general, like the topic and also the discussion afterwards, I asked Marcel Stefanik. I don't really know how you pronounce your if it's Stefanik your surname, but
you're good.
And he okay, and he has been working since for a long time with the Red Cross, but especially with International Federation of the Red Cross. Since 2012, he joined the Secretariat of the Red Cross as global technical lead for youth engagement. So he's responsible for embedding value-based engagement and in general youth people, how to work with youth people and work with them in how to work the values or the youth values into the policies of the International Federation of the Red Cross. So that's it on my part. So I'll just leave you to Marcel and his part of the lecture. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alan. Thank you very much, Emilia and Anna, for having me. It has been a great pleasure for me to be receiving the invitation. I was thinking when Alan said that yes, May 8th was the usual, day when we all in the Red Crescent commanded the foundation of the movement, and this year's the campaign was called "We Are Unstoppable." So it kind of like sounds like a bit kind of like a Eurovision song, but I really believe that it did kind of like spoke to what people have been facing and contributing as volunteers over the last year in these unprecedented times. So thank you for the invitation again, and I'm going to be spending some time introducing the youth engagement in the IFRC. IFRC is a collection of national societies that are across 192 territories. Usually it's the state territories. And please, whenever you feel that you would like to have a question or you want to comment, please just, go ahead, interrupt me. I'm very happy with, having lectures with kind of elements of questions and engagement. If I speak too quickly, also please kindly remind me. I tend to get extremely passionate about what I talk about, so might happen that I'm not really very clear. I hope the connection is good, and thank you, Alan, for helping me out with the PowerPoint. So I hope that this way I can see the faces of you plus the presentation, or is it that way, right? That's possible now, like the way how it is set up, right? Because I can, yes, I can switch, I can separate the perfect.
Yeah, okay. And also, like, if someone raises their hand, they should appear, like, if you have the grid view, they should appear like at the top or in the left corner, so that you can see that they have their hands raised.
Excellent. Cool. Perfect. So let's start. Yes, Alan. So what I would like to do today is to give you a bit of an overview about the youth engagement, but having a bit of a retrospective and look at the times before the 2013. Before that, we didn't have a federation-wide youth engagement strategy which would be guiding the 192 national societies across the world with different cultures and habits. But still, the youth engagement was quite seriously entrenched in all of the work of Red Cross, Red Crescent national societies all over the world. So today I will spend some time and speak about our institutional history and commitments, but also about the practice that was supposed to be, very much in line with the commitment. Then I will spend a little bit of time exploring the SIG dependency. I will talk about yes, but not really, and then also about one size never fits all. I guess, it's just kind of these very catchy, I believe, statements. You get to know more, but let's start with overview of the history and institutional commitments and practice. Yeah. So, as I said, we have a history of youth engagement in the Red Cross Red Crescent movement. And usually when I try to, show the pride of where I work currently, because before I was a volunteer in the governance structures. So now I'm paid staff. I usually would say that the movement and people it attracted in the past, since its inception, has been, very visionary, that we really attracted very visionary men and female. And the reason why is that if we look at the archives and check the the history from 1859, when the Battle of Solferino took place, and that was the starting point for the movement, we have a lot of milestones that are also pertinent to youth engagement. So let's do a little bit of quiz. Okay, let's go. Yeah, that's the next part, and let's go to the quiz. So the question I have, what do you think? When was the first attempt in the Red Cross Red Crescent to allow young people being associated with the activities of the Red Cross Red Crescent? When was the first time? The Battle of Solferino was in 1859. What do you think? Any guesses? You can use the chat or just kind of unmute yourself and just go ahead. Any guesses? So 1859 is the starting point. So I believe to shy. No guesses?
Maybe around 1920.
Okay, 1920, 1970. Okay, 1950s. Okay, so basically, Alan, please give us the answer by clicking. 1892. So basically, you can see okay, around 40 years after the really serious business in Solferino, the Battle of Solferino, there were first attempts to somehow make associations with youth led actions. There was a proposal for it, and in 1892 we were not ready because that proposal was turned down, unfortunately. What do you think? When was the proposal for the setup of the youth engagement type of activities then somehow again proposed and approved? How many years do you think it took that somehow we changed our mind? Any guesses? Well, shockingly. Oh, yeah, well, yeah, Nina, very good. It actually took only 6 years. So in 1906, and actually, if we looked at the history, and it was in the United States, yes, exactly, Anna. There was 1906 was very, very tragic for San Francisco because of the earthquake, and it was the tragedy of the earthquake that kind of somehow helped young people to get in the Red Cross Red Crescent national societies. So the next one, when do you think that we officially founded Red Cross Red Crescent youth program on a global level? So it was not only in San Francisco, but it kind of like somehow got established as a way to go in the whole world. What do you think? When was the need for kind of like, one can say, you know, like young people, fresh blood in history? What was the kind of like big milestone on the timeline? Oh yeah, well, World War First, actually. So it was in 1922 that we started the youth program, and then somehow, like, you know, many national societies took it on board. They kind of like engaged young people, allowed for their, you know, activities, allowed for activities targeting them as at that time called beneficiaries, which we don't use anymore for quite some time. We call young people, like, you know, any other constituencies as members of affected communities. Perfect. But then it somehow kind of like, you know, grew over the time and across many countries. So there was kind of like some need for a global guidance. So what do you think? There was an establishment of a youth advisory board that was giving advice on the global level to the member organizations about how to do youth engagement. When do you think that, you know, it was somehow again, you know, brought to life? And again, it links to a great event in the whole world, when again, like, demand for fresh blood was there, very significant. Yes, exactly. So it was 1946. So basically after the end of the World War II. Then when we move ahead and look into how we institutionalized basically all of the advices that were given, and kind of like an effort in institutional continuity was by establishing youth policy and youth strategy document. When do you think did that happen? How many years did we need to understand that, oh, the advice from the established advisory body would need to be somehow captured and, you know, like institutionalized and you know, somehow like documented, so that there is an institutional continuity and institutional knowledge about how to do youth engagement. So from the committee 1946, we are looking at when did the policy strategy document came to life. That would be too early. We were not that kind of like, you know, I would say eager on young people and making sure, no, little bit later. 85, little bit later. It took quite, yes, almost like it was in the 1991 when the International Federation introduced a global youth policy and strategy that was then reconfirmed in 1999. So, and again, you can see there was a kind of like almost 50 years gap, or 40, you know, between establishing a body to advise and then institutionalizing all of the generated knowledge and approaches into a document that was then basically validated by all the membership, and the membership somehow committed to adapting the global youth policy and strategy. All right, then when we look at the composition of the youth advisory body, let's call them Youth Commission, in 1946. What do you think, what would be the profile? If you close your eyes and you were told that, you know, there were like 9 seats for this committee, what would you see? Like, whom would you see as members of this committee? Just give me a kind of like, you know, how is it called? This on Facebook, you have those avatar, right? So how would you see them? Would there be like women, men? Well, not that we would not have like smart female, but actually it was very kind of like much about white male, usually Anglo-Saxon, because these exactly Anglo-Saxon on Western, because it was linked, it was a global body. So of course, there were other bodies that were more attractive, like Finance Commission. But then, you know, you had to also satisfy all the smart, older white men who didn't manage to get into these important commissions or committees. So they kind of like, you know, usually would end up in the Youth Commission. So then big milestone happened in 2007 when the Federation has changed the way how this advisory body worked. The advisory body became a constitutional body. It means it can only be removed by voting in the General Assembly. Second, the profile of the members has been changed, and there was put a not only an age limit, but also a profile, so that, of course, like you will understand, we have young people in the body deciding and advising on the global level on youth engagement, right? Which was a big deal for us in 2007. Then when we go to the next milestone, basically in 2007, that was the constitutional change that happened with the profile. And then in 2013, that was like big thing, because after all of this history, and basically you can say knowledge and all of the good that young people have done within the Red Cross National Societies, we came to a point when we officially developed and endorsed IFRC youth engagement strategy. And that was in 2013. It is a global guidance that is basically not dependent on the culture you have, and it's basically universal. So we can get to that a little bit later on. And since 2013, there was another step we took, and in 2019 there was another constitutional change in the federation, which basically spoke to the way how the Youth Commission is established. So you had young people with a profile for experts in the youth engagement who were part of this governance body. But in 2019, what happened was that who was voting for these people in before? It was the national societies, so meaning the adult leaders. In 2019, the change was that it was basically young people, youth delegates with a profile voting for the representatives from all over the world, 9 people, to be sitting on this body. And before, technically, the members were not really elected. They were these terms in law. They were appointed. So not only did young people elect their representatives, but at the same time, the mandate of those members on the body is much stronger, as well as the accountability to the constituents of young people who represent around half of the 14 million active volunteers all over the world. So I believe that with this selection of key milestones, you kind of got a bit of an idea about the way how we in the movement somehow approached youth engagement, and where we are somehow at this point when it comes to demand towards ourselves, when it comes to our commitments. And of course, the practice is always another issue. And at the global level, you can see okay, yes, we are kind of having it. But then, of course, there is usually the gap between the reality, depending on national society or the region. Nevertheless, we are seeing over the last 8 years significant progress that has been achieved also thanks to the youth engagement strategy as a guiding document that takes away the wind from people telling us, oh, no, you know what, this doesn't work. Young people in decision making, not possible, because in our culture, you have to be actually 45 to be considered relevant for decision making. But actually, by the way, the time when people usually die in our country is 48. So this type of narrative was omnipresent in the past, and that's what I said. That's why I said the youth engagement strategy is universal, because it doesn't really, I would say, accept cultural, practices and habits and societal norms as a way for not to advance meaningful youth engagement. Now, if we move ahead, and you are fine with that, yes, please, Alan. Yes. So we kind of got the, yes, please put it off. We got the overview of the commitments, and I believe that you kind of could have seen the milestones of the developmental trajectory in the movement when it comes to youth engagement, right? Now, I said that I will speak about the SIG. The SIG is basically made-up word, which basically tells me and tells you that the experience of young people either in 1906 or in 2019, before 1906 and let's say 2010, would be very much different and dependent on first senior leadership, so meaning the adults, that's the S. Then it would depend on the interpersonal likes and dislikes, that's the I. It would also depend on good luck, if you had a good local branch secretary or not. And then it would also basically depend very much on the innate justification of culture, why you as a young person would get the space or would not be getting the space. So this SIG dependency didn't really kind of play in favor of young people who would be interested in engaging with Red Cross, Red Crescent National Societies. Then, we were also kind of having a lot of narratives which would be telling young people, yes, young people do more, do better, and they will help us reach further. But actually not really, because you know why? We tell you and you do. Then another narrative was that, the intergenerational collaboration and peer approaches are so crucial for, advancing the work of the Red Cross, Red Crescent. And actually not really, because there was no recognition of equally footed partnership across the membership. So there were like all of these kind of bumps on the road. Another one would be, oh yes, we acknowledge and appreciate both the development and also the use-led action, but actually not really. It was like, just kind of take action, don't worry about, helping us as an institution to grow from within. So you can identify this type of bumps on the road or the barriers to young people really kind of meaningfully engage and make impact in the Red Cross, Red Crescent National Societies prior to 2013, when really the youth engagement strategy came to play and was endorsed by the membership at the General Assembly as a guiding document that everybody voted for to basically follow and oblige. So at that time, with the reality in 2013, we knew that, okay, it's time for kind of creating a placeholder that would help us somehow institutionalize how to do meaningful youth engagement, so that when we speak, we mean the same. And that is why the process of the youth engagement strategy development started. What kind of happened briefly was, we developed a narrative in which, yes, Alan, please, in which we connected youth engagement as an intrinsic, contribution or a pillar to the Red Cross, Red Crescent. No, just let's go back. To the Red Cross, Red Crescent humanitarian excellence. And then we kind of made sure that people understand that if you do strong youth engagement, then you basically strengthen the programs, the Red Cross, Red Crescent programs, hence the humanitarian excellence in the field, which then basically helps communities and our engagement as service providers or partners to communities during the disasters, before, during, and after. And then it kind of ultimately contributes to strengthening the community resilience. So we established the narrative between a concept of resilience, which is very much about bridging developmental aid and humanitarian aid. And basically we made clear that without meaningful youth engagement, the community resilience strengthening is not happening as it kind of could. So the potential was not being reached, just basically because of one significant constituency of communities themselves has been, basically neglected, not at the table, not even talking about decision-making tables. So there was a lot of omission about the potential and also the needs and rights that young people, meaning children, adults, and young adults, have had as intrinsic, innate members of communities. After this kind of narrative, we also agreed or identified why Red Cross, Red Crescent National Societies and the current leaders, the adult senior leaders, should really care. Basically, institutionally, we are about ensuring that we have the capacity to deliver humanitarian services, not only, let's say, in the main cities or areas that are easy to reach, but we have to have the capacity to deliver and sustain the programs and services in the whole territory where national societies operate. Then another why to invest in youth engagement was that young people really help to kind of like, strengthen the continuity of the service. And not only just because of, the power, like a manpower, but also because of transfer of knowledge, transfer of competencies. And then institutionally, the national societies are like, flattening the sinusoid. Did I say it properly? Yeah, this curve basically, when leadership change comes because of, nature calls and people die, right? In the sense of like, leadership of the national society. The third reason was that if we really wanted to grow, it's natural, right? I mean, you cannot grow just without inputs from outside, like without, including people with fresh ideas, fresh perspectives, who kind of like, can give contributions that, can help us advance our capacity to deliver on our humanitarian mandate. And then, of course, the leadership renewal is in the interest of anybody, even though, many of the senior adults, and not only national societies, but all over the world, would have the tendencies to kind of like really cling to their positions, right? Because they would see leadership as positional and not actionable. So it's more about like, I have this position and I kind of like go stick to it. So after defining this narrative about youth engagement, contributions to their community resilience, through the understanding of the humanitarian excellence and community engagement, we defined the 4 whys. And then basically we went into providing like the building blocks of the youth engagement strategy, which basically recognized that we in the national societies are seeing young people as leaders. They are leading services, they are leading, initiatives, projects. Then we see them as contributors and volunteers in established programs and services. And then we know that we are also running programs and services that are targeting youth in the community. So we see them as members of affected communities. So these are the 3 engagement pathways we recognize from the past, and that we felt, would have to be established as a common understanding across all of the membership. But then we also looked at, so if you are engaging young people as leaders, or if you're engaging young people or children as members of affected communities because you, for example, deliver the water and sanitation program to them, what are our obligations? To basically help them not to be stuck at the position of youth as members of affected communities, but to kind of like somehow get empowered, and through effort of multiple players in the humanitarian landscape, in their communities, at their home, they would kind of like become strengthened and basically able to contribute to contributing with solutions to the community level problems, to their issues around them, and then potentially become leaders, not positional necessarily, and not necessarily within the Red Cross National Society, but maybe within their communities, within their peer groups, and etc. So we looked at that. How can we help to kind of young people get from this position of being a member of affected community? And we also recognize that in your life, you can happen to find yourself as a youth, as a child, adolescent, and adult, in various, pathways of how Red Cross at Crescent is engaging you. So the fluidity and transitional nature of these 3 pathways has been strongly underscored because of #life, right? And when it comes to the accountability for us, so if we want to engage young people in these 3 pathways, we have to be really thinking about 3 E's, which is education, empowerment, and enabling environment. Education, it's not only about, the knowledge, it's really about the competency and the skills that we are supposed to be, offering to people who are engaging with us, either as volunteers, leaders, or the members of affected communities. And of course, all of this should be developmentally appropriate. But then when you think of young people who are getting, let's say, first aid training, so it's like we are providing extreme high quality first aid training, but then the training doesn't kind of include the empowerment element, for example, about providing the first aid to somebody in your community who is usually ostracized or, you know, usually is discriminated against, it's not helpful as much as if we kind of like include these elements of empowerment in the training. Then imagine you have a group of young people who want to, they're self-motivated, they have like different interests, they want to become nurses, they want to become doctors, they want to become firefighters, or they want to just like, you know, for the purpose of, you know, having a newborn baby in their family, they want to learn first aid. Great. They come to us, we give them like, because we are guaranteeing high quality program, you know, like they will have the practical element, they will have the theoretical elements, they will have the situational, you know, education, etc. So with the empowerment elements too. But then we tell them, okay, so this is what we offer, and you have to come basically every Thursday for the length of a half year, and you have to arrive at 2 o'clock and stay until 5 o'clock, because this is the like amount of the time that is needed for the training. It's not possible, it's not conducive for them, right? So the fact that our offices and the local branches directors or like the other employees finish their shift, like working shift, right? Like they finish their working business hours, let's say at 4:30. That's the time when young people can really make themselves available because of, you know, I mean, I don't have to explain to you, right? The obligations that they have for school, after school activities and extracurricular activities, etc. So the third part, the third E, is enabling environment, which is basically speaking to the need to change our own processes, policies, approaches, so that we really become an agency of choice for young people who would like to do good and help us with delivery of our humanitarian mandate. So this is in a nutshell, kind of like, you know, the main elements of the youth engagement strategy that we put in place, and the membership of the federation approved, senior membership, senior leaders, and since then the implementation has been followed up. The next slide is basically just an overview. Please click, 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 click. Again. And you can see basically that the youth engagement strategy, the motto is strong youth for strong Red Cross Red Crescent and safe and resilient communities. So that kind of like is a narrative, you know, how the youth engagement links to the communities. Then the youth as leaders, volunteers, and members of affected communities across the 3 E's is basically speaking to the nature of interconnectedness. This is like maybe not the best representation, which I have like, you know, one graphic, one by a designer done, which is about like, you know, these dots that have a different color and they kind of like interact and intersect. So it's just that, you know, everybody who is thinking about, oh yes, we are doing meaningful youth engagement, that they have like, you know, certain checks for them to kind of like really confirm that they are really like, you know, serious about it. So in the youth engagement strategy, what you will find strategic directions and recommended actions across all of the 3 youth engagement pathways, so leaders, volunteers, members of affected communities, and they're going to have elements of education, empowerment, and enabling environment. The humanitarian education is a specific type of education that links with the youth empowerment, and it is very much about value-based education. So, for example, it doesn't speak to the technical, let's say, training in water and sanitation or first aid. So this is a special part of the whole education business, let's call it that way, or education activities that we do that is specifically mentioned here and should not be neglected. And as you can see that basically the strategy, yes, we call it yes, is built on the high-level commitments in the strategy 2030 that was adopted in 2010. No, yes. Sorry, so I have a mistake there. It's like supposed to be strategy 2020, so which was adopted in 2010, and then it builds on the IFRC use policy. The next slide is basically giving us a bit of a repetitive narrative about how do we, like, you know, explain, yes, you can put the next 2 clicks. How do we explain, you know, youth engagement in an elevator pitch? So for us, it is intrinsic to development of national societies. volunteerism is central to attracting young people as a part of their youth engagement in civil society. This speaks also to the fact that some national societies in the past, they used to first use young people just a labor force, do what we are being told. We need to tidy up some kind of like, storage spaces. So please come and do it. The second part, the green one, is about some natural societies you would find, especially in the Western world, advertisements. Maybe you can still find them, but you shouldn't, really, about a ladder, young person on the ladder, and like, hey, come to the Red Cross. You will become, a president, or you will kind of like have a kind of like, good things to write in your CV. So basically, the green part, the green box says that no, it is in the interest of all of the national societies to advertise volunteerism as the entry point, with recognition or caveat that we cannot control motivations, ambitions of young people or whomever, not only the young people, right, who are engaging with the Red Cross as members, but we are strictly to be advertising volunteering as the entry point. Then we have the 3 E's that basically are vital for us doing the meaningful youth engagement responsibly and impactfully. The next bubble speaks about, like young people representing more. It has been consistently over like, maybe 30, 40 years from the data that we had. They were more than a half of the all volunteers in the national societies, but they never really had the kind of like really strong say in decisions and directions of the national societies. They usually would have to fight with kind of like senior adults, etc., etc. So this blue bubble is really kind of elevating the fact that young people are the agents of change, who are very well versed with with addressing global challenges that are of course pertinent to their local communities where they live. And the last one is an argument for decision making and young people at the decision making tables at all levels, and not only because of the leadership renewal and like let's kind of like invest into the future leaders of the organization, but basically also because of the fact that usually adults, right, when they kind of like assume a certain position, stature, etc., it's natural that they kind of like lose touch with the reality and the diversity of the reality in communities. Whereas young people, because of they are there in various roles, they have like different social and societal position, they are the ones also active in the field, delivering the programs and services, who know what is going on. So having them at the decision-making tables helps us not only for the transfer of experiences and knowledge, but also for better targeting and fine-tuning the programs and services that we as the movement deliver. And I believe that we are entering the last slide, which basically in 2013, we also defined the vision. I mean, like that was mainly like, the first thing that I could have spoken about, but I guess that in my presentations of the youth engagement strategy, I like to go with the vision last, even though I wrote it as the first, because it's, I would say, at least I think, kind of like more humane. It's not so kind of like conceptual in that regard, and it kind of like really paints out the picture of what we aspired for achieving, right, in 2013. So we hoped at that time that in 2020, so in around 10 years after the adoption of the youth engagement strategy, we would have national societies as incubators for young people who basically would say, oh, engagement with Red Cross Red Crescent was kind of like a great experience and it was life-changing. It provided me opportunity to develop my leadership identity. It gave me the chances to do the right thing, to give back, and to kind of like become a person who really values collective community advancement versus individual gain. We also foresaw like vision that with the youth engagement strategy, we wanted to make sure that young people coming from the Red Cross Crescent incubators would represent the heterogeneous cohort, and that they would be able, through the engagement with the Red Cross, Red Crescent, able to, like, somehow realize their needs, potentials, ambitions. And that would be all rooted in basically the living of the fundamental principles that are guiding the humanitarian services. So it would be not, like all of profit and all of the individual gain. So, and again, the part of the vision said that we wanted to see young people and recognized by their own national societies as the driving force of local solutions. And as if you have like more than half of your volunteers are young people, they really are the ones who give you credibility as a local actor, and they are the ones who kind of like are helping you become the partner of choice in the communities with kind of like other agencies around that are also offering structured engagement to young people. And lastly, in the vision we spoke about that young people will be basically the ones who will be extremely helpful to Red Cross, Red Crescent national societies in addressing the human suffering of like the future soltherinos. So that kind of like spirit is kept, and it kind of like would also help that we are not stuck in the past, but are also like pertinent and responsive to the actual needs in the communities. And hereby, I think that I would like to thank you for your attention. I hope that I didn't go too quickly. I hope it was somehow, like giving you a nutshell feel about where we were, why 2013 has been such a big milestone for us, and what we try to somehow kind of like, achieve with this strategic document that is owned by the home membership. And on the last slide, you had the vision of youth engagement 2030. And the reason for that is that we still are not there, even though the vision was called Vision 2020, because we put it forward in 2013, which kind of like, is also in fact a result of the reality, I mean, like the status quo and diversity of where we are as national societies, where are the people who are getting the senior leadership positions in national societies, etc., etc. Nevertheless, I want to believe that people from national societies would agree that at least since 2013 and then continuously, with other milestones, there is this like, points of reference for them when the senior adults are kind of like, let's call it stubborn, and are like really not creating the spaces for the meaningful youth engagement, that they can kind of like reference, excuse me, but if I'm not mistaken, it's here. So you better have a good reason in a way, like, to not to follow what has been endorsed on the global level. So I really would want to hope, and I remember that from my times when my national society, when I was the youth president, they wanted to shut us down. They wanted to change the national society statute to kind of like abolish the youth-led structure. They actually moved us out of the headquarters and put us into a place which kind of like was next to a bakery. There was a small office. So there were really kind of like significant efforts to kind of like basically complicate the youth engagement and to kind of like, I guess, do the things their own way without much of a kind of like rebellious contributions, if you will. So, and it was really helpful to have a kind of like global reference that helped me in, let's call it, negotiating, positioning, influencing, because I remember until today, every meeting I went for as a youth president to meet the Secretary General, who was the top executive, and I wasn't the governing board member. So he was the executive counterpart. Every meeting I went, I had like cramps in my stomach, and I had 5 options and 5 scenarios prepared. Right? I mean, like for what I wanted to achieve. And I always kind of like tried like, let him choose, but I will be the one who will put there the opportunities and like the 5 options. But it was really, really tough. So I would want to hope that young people these days, with these kind of like, documents, are able to have a bit of a kind of like, easier life in pursuit of what they want, and that they have a bit of a, different level of influence, especially looking at the other national societies, they're like, okay, look, it is possible here. So let's kind of like try to make it here. So I will leave it there, and over to you. Thank you very much again for your patience and attention. I spoke a lot.
Thank you so much for the absolutely fantastic presentation. As I said, like you can, like if you want to ask questions, you can just raise your hand, and I'll give you the words so that you can ask a question. I'll start with a question from mine because I have the privilege of being the moderator, so I'll sneak in a question of mine. And I know what you were talking, especially in the end. Like I came to Red Cross when it was already kind of, in Italy at least, when it was a little easier, especially because Italy has been doing quite the work on youth engagement and everything. But how do you manage a situation like that? Like, how do you manage to actually work against those forces? And how do you make them understand that what you're trying to do is not actually just taking power as a young person because you want power, but you actually are trying to get a better way of actually doing stuff which would work better?
So I find it extremely, so there was a conference, and imagine Asia Pacific, as many you might know, very structured, very hierarchical society. And I had a workshop there at the regional conference for young people, but it was open to others too. So like adult leaders, senior leaders could have come. And I talked about, so how do you, turn it? Where is the tipping point? Everybody is like, trying, you get exhausted, and then just kind of like new come and they kind of like try to like put the same effort into the same things, and like there is not much of a, change seen or felt, and there is like always a bit of like a lot of frustration. So, you have better things to do. So like, you don't want to give up at the same time. So there, I kind of like took a risk, and I basically put it out there. It's about institutional change. It's about understanding the change processes and how change works in institutions. It's about, in briefly, right? It's about understanding what are the norms, what are the unspoken rules, who are the influencers, who are like the ones whom you kind of like basically have to have on your side to kind of like, get through. At the same time, like those theoretical complex concepts like cheese theory, etc., etc., etc. There are like so many. You can have that knowledge. You can do strategic planning with that. You can identify your allies. But then at the end of the day, what if you are kind of like faced with, okay, but if I want to achieve the institutional good, I have to compromise myself. And that's kind of like, the tension that you have to resolve. Because in a way, oftentimes what you have to do, because you know what they want, but you're just not willing to do it because you feel like it would compromise you. So I think the answer is, I would say very briefly, in understanding the theory of change, the development like approaches to change, understanding that people have things at stake, they have fears, and then on your end, what can you do? Because like, understanding the theory, understanding the others, that's kind of like really, really helpful. It kind of like helps you to kind of like understand people, how they respond, how they react, what is at their stake, what they have at stake. But then where I feel like you can do so much, it's when you work on yourself, when you work on your leadership identity development, when you understand why this and that kind of like really gets to you. Like, how come, as opposed to, oh, they don't get me, how come I cannot make my message come through? So the kind of like, and that investment in you and your leadership identity development will be not lost. You might kind of like still experience that, there is not much change, not much impact, but at least I would want to hope that you will see the impact on you, that you will not get so much stressed, worked out, and kind of like you will kind of like be able to take a distance, let go, and just kind of like still find the, you know, what kind of like excites you about the volunteering activity, because it's volunteering, it's not for paid job, right? So, and when I talk about leadership identity development, leadership, it's a journey. That's why it's an identity and it's a development. That's why I use these three words: leadership, identity, development. In many, even like, you know, university, college programs, they will not acknowledge the fact that leadership is an identity. It is something that you can like learn, and that it is developmental. There's a journey. And that is why they link it with kind of like, you know, doing a presentation, kind of like, you know, standing up in front of people. Remember that kind of like, you know, you have to have a blue background and like yellow letters. You should dress appropriately. I mean, know your audience. But that's not, I believe, what is, it's important, but I mean, like, come on. There is so much other things that are important, which are about how to say no, how to be assertive, how to kind of like apologize, you know, when you make a mistake. So all of this, which speaks to the identity and the competency, being a human being. So I think that would be my answer. I don't know, like, if it really gives you a bit of an idea about how to approach it, but this is how I would approach it. If I were, I would find a coach, and I would find peer supporters. I would find online courses that would kind of like give me an insight about, I have a struggle to say no, because not in my culture, that's not what kind of like we are like raised to, right? And then how do you kind of like, I mean, become assertive but not aggressive? So that kind of like, I mean, take I would have.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, in the end, like practice makes perfect. So we need to also kind of train and be like, that's also what the Red Cross does. Like, it puts you in front of situations who are difficult, and you need to actually develop your skills to overcome them. I have a question
there, Alan, that, you know, I think that we often forget that we build reputations. We all have a track of record. And that is the very difficult part, you know, I mean, to also recognize, like, you know what, maybe somebody else can make that change better.
Yeah. I have a question on the chat by Annie, who I don't know if she's still in actually, but we'll use the question anyways. And she asked, I really like the urban action toolkit that the IFRC recently published, and I know of separate incidents of youth groups and informal settlements organizing emergency relief and preparedness activities for their communities. Are there opportunities for such youth groups to access the urban action toolkit? And perhaps even collaborate with their local Red Cross chapters? Maybe, I don't really know what the urban action toolkit is, so.
Yeah, so I promoted it recently. It's a toolkit that speaks about, you know, like youth-led action in urban context. And I mean, there is like, you know, the disaster risk reduction like element, right? And is any here?
I don't see her anymore. So because she said that her connection was unstable. So maybe.
So basically, it's a toolkit that provides tools, very friendly tools, very user-friendly tools. You know, like, it's not kind of like 55 pages thesis by a doctor in a climate crisis field. So it's a really like actionable toolkit with proposed activities that young people can carry out themselves in the communities, or, you know, usually in preparedness, like, you know, scenarios. And the question basically is, so yes, that's the thing. I mean, we always try to make the resources that are out there available to young people. So it's not only about availability on the internet, where the kind of like, you know, the access might be like not really happening, or be also about like languages, for example, right? So that's kind of like very important. Then I can tell you that, you know, usually when young people themselves don't have the either internet access or don't have the, let's say, data necessary for either attending calls or like, you know, providing downloading materials, there is always the local branch as a kind of like, you know, structure that usually is equipped with these type of let's call them like tools and services. So we are trying at the same time, though, you know, if you imagine non-Red Crescent affiliated young people, they can get access to that, right, online, and they can use it even though they are not Red Crescent News affiliated, because we are recognizing that we don't own our volunteers, we don't own our youth, right? And it's very much in line with the concept I described before. Contributing to the community resilience is a job collective of many actors, right? So in that regard, I want to believe that, you know, we are doing pretty good job. And I can tell you also that we have the decentralized system of the Secretariat. So I sit in Geneva, and I have regional offices we have in 5 regions, because we have 5 regions where we work: Americas, MENA, Middle East and North Africa, then Asia Pacific and Europe. So which covers also part of Asia and Eurasia. So I can tell you that whenever we are like, you know, doing something on youth engagement and it's in English, my colleagues from Americas will say like, excuse me, Marcel, is there a budget line for this being produced in Spanish? Then colleagues from Africa call me, yeah, we have like many national societies that actually work in French. So then from Russian speaking national societies from Europe, I get the same message. So we are very aware of language being the usual barrier to the access, internet connection to be a barrier to the access. But honestly, I mean, like among us, I can tell you that we still learn, because last 2 weeks ago, there was this global youth summit organized by Big Six and it's like big organizations of youth, spearheaded by Scouts. And of course, it was virtual. And we had, I guess, like, you know, about 20 sessions that our young people prepared for this summit about activities on education, migration, etc., etc. And of course, it was online, and you know, colleagues, technical leads in migration, for example, prepared a briefing. So kind of like the people are accompanied, so in line with kind of like, you know, the education, empowerment, enabling environment. So what happened was that there was a briefing, preparatory briefing, that our young person from Identified National Society attended. He was basically the lead of the whole session. So he was like just being like, you know, in discussion with this technical lead from the Secretariat. But then his data ran out. So then he wrote an apologetic email, like, you know, that like, oh, so sorry, but, you know, I mean, like my data ran out, and kind of like, you know, I don't have money to kind of like, you know, purchase the new data for myself. So, and that was like that was a big lesson learned. You know, they tell you penetration of mobile services and mobile phones, like, you know, it's so big and big and big all over the world. Every young person has mobile phone and smartphone. At the same time, not everybody has the smartphone. Charging of these machines is an issue. And then apparently, like, you know, when you think of somebody leading a session, not just kind of like joining as a participant, because like you can say like, maybe you can go to the Wi-Fi. Well, not really, not in every country. So what I'm trying to say is that we are still learning when it comes to not only access to, but also facilitation of participation and contribution of young people. So we made a strong case, then we immediately fixed it and made sure that, you know, you can understand that this is kind of like a culturally accepted practice in respective cultures and national societies, that you as a volunteer, you make own investments into the activities that benefit the national society, which is totally wrong and is like against volunteering policy. Still, it happens because cultures are difficult to change. But in this case, we engage the national society leadership and corrective measures were taken. So, but again, you know, I mean, in 2021, you would think that we would not be experiencing that somebody is first investing his own money into getting connected. Secondly, that we didn't think as an institution about this kind of accompaniment, right? But it comes also from the fact that when we are having young people meet face-to-face in general assemblies or different conferences, we normally know insurance, insurance, accommodation, per diem, flight ticket, I mean, trip to the visa country where the visa will be issued. We never really like deal with, like data packages. So lesson learned.
Yeah, sometimes you just need to have like a complete different perspective or some event happening. Like I remember Sulfur, like last time we met each other, like just meeting also people who were just like, we talk a lot about climate change, but when you actually meet people who live in islands that won't be there in the next 50 years, your perspective changes, and like in general this helps.
So it's about really like, but then I really think that the agility of like taking action is so important, because oftentimes we like remain at the intellectual level. Oh, this is eye-opening, but then like what do we really kind of like, can we, and like do we want to do something about it? So that's also very important, meaningful user engagement. Kind of like when you figure out things are not all right, to really kind of like make your best to fix it.
Yeah, definitely. I don't see any questions either in the chat or hands raised, so I'll ask another one of mine because I have questions. But if you guys have any questions, again, just either send them to me via chat, I can read them, or like put them in the chat, or just raise your hand. My question is, like people who know me know that I like to play devil's advocate, and so I like to also, like, especially when talking about the youth, I like to quote most of the other volunteers I worked with, and who, for example, raised doubts about putting young people in leadership positions. They have doubts because they're so young, in a sense. I'll take the Italian situation because that's what I know. But in Italy, like, the national youth representative is the vice president of the whole national organization. Is it wise, in a sense, to put and the guy who ran, who didn't win, actually, like, he was 1 year younger than me, so 24. Like, is it wise to put a 24-year-old in charge of an organization as big as the Italian Red Cross? He's not completely in charge, of course. There's a whole thing of also paid staff. Why should we actually put the political decision and the political compass in the hands of someone who hasn't really started their life sometimes? Because at 23, you're probably still studying. You're not, like, in Italy especially, it's different. Why is this such an important thing to do?
Well, it comes with a prejudice, right? Because it seems like that on this world, you only have to age to get some kind of like, respect and opportunity. Like, usually it's very much linked with that. I remember when I was very, very young, I was maybe like 22, and I was attending a conference on HIV/AIDS stigma discrimination of, like in the federation. So it was taking place in Kazakhstan. And there was this extremely smart woman doing a presentation. She was from Finland. So she was a woman, maybe she was in her, like 35 years old, so maybe kind of like 15 years older than me. And I was sitting with my delegation with the professors, who are working in the field of HIV/AIDS prevention, like very smart doctors, leaders of institute, whatsoever. And listening to her, what they were saying, like, extremely smart. She's really, really good. She really knows her business. Such a pity. Why those dreads? Why can it's kind of like so not appropriate. And then the conversation about, like the substance was gone. So that was like, what she faced because of being a woman, because of being the dready, kind of like, the kind of like, somehow. And then what she told me, once we kind of like had an opportunity at the end of the meeting to like, discuss and blah, blah. And she told me, Marcel, you are, how did she say it? You are incredibly smart, but disgustingly young. So I was like, but what can I do? I cannot age quicker, right? So, or, like I got opportunities and I was interviewed for positions to be a deputy head of the delegation. in Haiti, like let's say 6 years after the big earthquake. Everything was great, everything went great, all of the interviews. There was the last step, they kind of like already sent me the contract to review, but there was the last thing, and that was that the head of the delegation has the last say. And basically, I was never offered the job because the head of the delegation said I was too young to manage a team of 15 people in his absence, right? Because we would be kind of like sharing that type of responsibility if he was out of the country. So I think aging is kind of like really a part of the kind of like, prejudice to people, like, you haven't aged, you don't know, and etc., which I believe is so not true. We should be talking about young people, not as young, but about, young people like young nurse, young doctor, young lawyer, or lawyer to become. You know what I mean? Like to really destigmatize the prejudices around, contribution of young people. And, there is a story which happened in my national society. My vice president at the time when I was a president, so we were like 22. It was a big deal because there was a local branch secretary in a very, very strong branch that was very much kind of like, proactive, pro-youth, young people in positions. What happened, she selected somehow like a kind of like, accompanied and whatsoever, the vice president of mine, and he became the chair of the local branch. Unheard of, unseen, like, whoa. Finished in half a year. Why? No accompaniment, no support in like, swimming with the sharks. And basically his case and the situation was used for like, oh yeah, well, we tried, but didn't work out. So let's have that as a lesson, without really understanding that he couldn't have succeeded. He couldn't have, because of, like if you are serious about bringing people who are missing at the table, young, female, whatsoever, underrepresented, you cannot pretend that they will be thriving, even though they're extremely smart, in places where the culture is not used to having them at the table. Because that's the point, right? I mean, that's the kind of like the norms, like unspoken rules and all of that stuff. So basically you are entering a circle of not very, I would say, friendly places. So I think that it's in the interest of the society, of the humanity, to invest in young people. And how do you invest in young people if you don't give them, like safe spaces and opportunities to either contribute, witness, and make decisions or be part of that? We have the parallel structure, like you have the youth structure, and then you have an adult structure. And basically, they are supposed to be in connection, so that ideally, the youth president, who is part of the board as a vice president in Italy, he's seeing and learning stuff that he can apply in his position of the president of the youth structure, right? And then hopefully, if you do a good job, once we will see these people like contributing to the adult national society, because like they also age, right? And at the point, you cannot be the youth representative anymore. So, but I get you. I mean, like there are people who are kind of like, even in my house, my colleague who used to be the head of the planning, monitoring, evaluation and reporting department, when we discussed the youth policy using a strategy and like, indicators to measure the success and the impact, he basically told me like he doesn't care. And he told me like, look, Marcel, I have 2 kids. So I care about kids. I care about children. But this is nonsense. I know what, why. I was like, please explain to me. I almost lost it. But I said like, please explain to me. And he said, look, if there's a disaster, the first thing what people need is what? I was like, water. And he was like, exactly. And then what? I was like, shelter. Exactly. We know that. I was like, yes, we do. And he was, I don't care. Like, I mean, because I don't care to distinguish between the kind of like, needs of children, adolescents, young adults, and me as an adult, because we all need the same water. There is no need for distinction. And I was like looking at him and I was like, but do you know that actually children and adults, the elderly, they need to be the first one getting the water, because they are at the threat of like losing their life because of the hydration is like big issue for them. So it's kind of like, people are so opinionated. And usually also maybe like we don't have so many as like, as the convinced ones and converted ones. We might not have really the real arguments to kind of like have them open their eyes. But maybe it's also difficult to have them open their eyes when their hearts are closed.
Yeah, I guess it's like everything boils down to, again, the generational clash and having like the different, like it's something that every generation has to go through to actually break the distance between the older generation and the new one.
But then what would you say? I mean, if you think of these generational kind of like clashes and generational gaps, they are bigger, smaller. But one would want to hope that, that the generations to come will have it a little bit easier, right? Because that would be the sign of a kind of like progress. But then the question is like, how do we make it happen? How do we facilitate it? If you think of, like the movement of Black people, then the movement of so like ending slavery, and then you think of the LGBTQI movement, then you look at the climate crisis movement, like, they all had to go through the same. But actually, did it help? Like, can we transfer the experience and all the suffering and success from the Black movement or Black Lives Matter movement before even like this 2000 whatever years to the LGBTQI and then to the climate crisis? And then if you think like, even within these groups where the constituencies belong, when you speak to, let's say, young Black person, an old Black person, or a young gay person, an older gay person, they would kind of like have a gap. And it's like within the group, because they would kind of like often say, oh, you don't appreciate what we had to do for you to be where you are.
I don't know. The thing is also like if we see, or like the generation of my parents, like when they were my age, they had the same things that I have, like the idea of being actually seen and actually being important. But then that generation is the one who actually is not allowing to. So I guess it's kind of, it repeats itself, like the fact that like already like the ancient Romans said the same thing. It might be because it's periodic, but yeah, it also depends how once we grow up, how we will actually facilitate the younger generations. And
it's really like not only about the point when you are growing up, but do you know the concept of queen bee? Have you ever heard of that?
No.
So it's very much pertinent to the female leadership position, and I think it's kind of like not only pertinent, but the queen bee, Zaha Hadid, she was a very famous architect worldwide, amazing, like she did like some amazing work, but she was the queen bee, meaning she was extremely harsh on her female colleagues. And basically the queen bee's like, motto is, I went through it and I managed, you can too. And that's the kind of like attitude which I believe, like we have to be clocking. Like, excuse me, I appreciate your suffering. You had it very, very hard, but please, as opposed to like imposing the same or like telling me like, deal with it, help me make it kind of like less suffering, less kind of like, exhausting, frustrating in this world. And I believe that's the point. I mean, like, clocking ourselves and like people around us who basically have this type of attitudes of, I went through it, you can, and to kind of like do it in a way without waiting for, like them to be in positions of power or at a certain age. And again, it requires courage on our end to be like, and again, to know how to challenge this type of attitude without losing, because I have so many things at stake. Can you imagine like working with Zaha Hadid, seeing that she's doing this? You see it, people know it, it's known. How do you challenge her without losing the job in such a high profile company? And being a woman in architects kind of like world, you have really many things at stake. So that's again for me leadership identity development. I don't know what you should decide, but if you know yourself well, and if you are like making decisions that are informed by understanding who you are, what you want to contribute, and what you're going to get, that's fine, right? Because it's an informed decision.
Yeah, it's the same reasoning behind hazing, and you need to be the one to be actually brave to break the circle, so that people after you don't actually. Okay, I think I don't see any questions. So if we don't have any questions right now from all the people, I think that it's a good place to actually stop. And thank you, Marcel, again for this. It was like finally, as I told you in our meetings before, I finally managed to bring the Red Cross to SIB, which is something which I've been working towards for quite some time. Thank you very much for coming, and I'll leave the floor back to Emilia.
Yes, also I just want to say thank you very much. I do want to give you a couple of announcements, mostly for the members here, but feel free to stay and listen. Next week in the association, we are organizing a mental health week with multiple events focused on the mental health and the mental health of students, especially right now during the Corona crisis. So there will be a lecture on Monday given about exactly that, and then on Thursday a workshop about perfectionism and the effect that that has on students, along with some other fun, encouraging things. So yeah, thank you all for coming again, and I hope to see you in the next week and all the weeks after that. And another applause for Mr. Stefanik.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I really hope that you spend the time in a meaningful reflection, and I do hope that you have a lot of questions, maybe like at least for yourself. And I'm like, I'm so envious. You are having like so interesting workshops and sessions and opportunities. I would want to go to my university studies again.
Well, it's all public if you ever want to attend something.
Oh, well, yeah. Okay, thank you for the opportunity again. And take care and be well.